Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to us here in the Irish-Hellenic Society in Dublin, and a very great welcome also to you in Clinton in Massachusetts, where we're looking forward to having a wonderful evening in the company of Kent Dure Russell. Let me just say a few words about the Irish-Hellenic Society. We were founded in 1962, so we're 60 years old this year. And we're lovers of Greece. Hellenic means Greek. And we're going to come across the word Hellenic later on in the Hellenic roots of the icon from Byzantium to Russia. I've spent quite a bit of my time in Greece over the years, and as well as living in Athens, the capital, where diplomats have to live. Athens, though, was not a particularly Byzantine city. The really big Byzantine city was Constantinople, now Istanbul, and formerly Byzantium, the city of three names. But there is another city with a great Byzantine heritage, which is now in the modern Greek state, which is called Thessaloniki. And it is very much a Byzantine city. It has one of the most beautiful Byzantine museums you have ever seen. Lots of people go to Thessaloniki and they see the treasures from Vergina, and they don't go across the street and see the most magnificent museum. Everything Byzantium lives in Thessaloniki. The whole city is a Byzantine city. So I recommend you to go there. And in between Thessaloniki and Constantinople stroke Istanbul, you have Mount Athos. And ladies, I'm sorry to say you will not be able to go to Mount Athos, but gentlemen, you can go there if you apply for a kind of a visa, and it is a magnificent place. And the joy of Mount Athos is the monastery of Aiou Panteleimonos, which is Saint Panteleimon. It's the Russian monastery. It's known as Rossikon. It's a huge monastery. You know, don't think of three monks. This monastery once housed 1,000 monks. It is by far the most vast monastery on Mount Athos, of which there are about 20. It's an independent republic of monks, but it's still part of the Greek state. But they have a special exemption under EU rules. No women are allowed. But women are allowed to the Irish-Hellenic Society, and they're allowed to the Museum of Russian Icons. I take it as well, Kent, in Clinton, Massachusetts. Let me just say a few words about Kent. He's a most unusual person because he's a New Yorker who came to Dublin for his education when all of the tracks were going in the opposite direction. And he went to Mountjoy School, which has a very good name related to another institution in Dublin that Brendan Behan went to, and we won't go into that. But Behan survived, and so did Kent. And he went on then to Trinity College, where he studied history of art, and he then got the Sarah Purser Fellowship to the National Gallery of Ireland, just around the corner from Trinity. And he has spent his lifetime in museums and in galleries, and he has been in his present position as curator and CEO of the Museum of the Russian Icon for the guts of the last 2 decades. So we're extremely privileged to have him talking to us, and it's my privilege to welcome Kent to talk to us about the Hellenic roots of the icon from Byzantium to Russia. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And it's nice to be in Dublin virtually. As a child, as a 13-year-old, when I finished my schooling in Collège Stanislas de Nice in France, I arrived in Dublin with halting English and Mountjoy School. And that was the world of, if any of you were old enough to remember Jamais and their French food and Russell Hotel and the 2 and 6 salmon or the trout lunch at the Shelburne Grill. Them were the days. But there it is, good old Dublin.
And it wasn't farmed salmon either.
So to hop right in, I'll talk a little bit about the Museum of Russian Icons, but we're here to talk about icons. And just remember that icons are primarily a visual form of text or prayer, and they're made for veneration. They're created as a sacred art. They're steeped in mystical and symbolic meaning. I often say to the volunteers who do tours here in the museum, if you suspect you see a symbol you're probably right. Go for it. And of course, icons originate in the Byzantine Orthodox Christian world, and that is the world of, uh, of Greece. So of course, you all know that. I always say, yes, icons are Greek. Um, you have to get over that when you run a museum of Russian icons, and we have many Greek Orthodox and Greek heritage visitors. And the first thing they say is that, well, Russian icons, please, they're Greek. And I quickly declaw the argument by saying, you're absolutely right, 100%, they're Greek. And now we have to move on and talk about Russian icons. But of course, in Ireland, you have a rich array of icons. You have Glenstall Abbey, you have the Chester Beatty, you have a number of other collections as well. And in actual fact, the National Gallery of Ireland, the collection way back in 1975, when I was a Purser Griffith Scholar Curator there, I helped install that particular section of the collection. Now, the Museum of Russian Icons here was founded in 2006 by a plastics industrialist who eventually wound up selling his 1.3 billion, and that's with a B, plastics operation, international operations, and he put most of his fortune into icons and the museum. And so from the outside, we're a very modest brick historic museum, but on the inside, you have this spectacular, very contemporary, beautiful installation for the icons. We're growing. As recently as early this year, we received a gift of a Fayum mummy mask from the 3rd century Egyptian funerary art. And I'll be talking a little bit about why a Fayum is in a museum of icons, let alone Russian icons. But we receive these spectacular gifts from time to time, and this is one of them that we received. So what is the mummy mask on a body doing in an icon museum? Well, these masks were developed in the 2nd and 3rd century in Greek colony of Egypt in the Fayum area. And the Greeks there had developed a portraiture tradition of wood, typically cedar, a scented wood, and very enduring and insect proof, and using encaustic or wax colors to create these very, very vivid portraits. And so, of course, the icon is a portrait. So you look at Byzantine prototypes, the Hellenic models, the European manuscripts, Mughal miniature painting, European prints, etc. But your very root of the formal how an icon comes to be and is made does come from the Greek colony of the late Greco-Roman Egyptian period of Egyptian history. The first kind of a thing that connects to icons that typically art historians refer to are the Emperor Severus's Tondo. This here is a portrait of him and his family. Of course, that's Caracalla, his son of the baths, depicted at the bottom. And this were these images done sort of 12 by 18, that kind of a scale, just the size of your face, were disseminated across the Roman Empire the way in the United States you'll find, or in embassies around the world, you'll find the picture of the Queen or the President or whatever it might be. And so these things were disseminated. Now, why I'm showing you this is that, of course, the early Christians were used to seeing these in civic buildings, and the people, the dramatis personae, obviously the emperor and his entourage and his family, were dressed in imperial robes. And so from the get-go, two things are fixed in the art of the icon: the formal structural quality of it that comes from that Egyptian Greek tradition of the wood panel, the encaustic, the painted face, the portrait, and then this, the official portrait in imperial robes. And that explains an oft asked question of why is Jesus, whom we all know by tradition was poor, why he's depicted in these imperial robes. It's a visual tradition that stems from this area. The other thing to look out for are things such as Sophia, the wisdom of God, the personification of the wisdom of God on the left on your screen. Sophia, of course, gives her name to one of the finest Byzantine pieces of architecture in the world, Hagia Sophia. And this image from our museum from the 1650s depicts the personification of wisdom sandwiched between the Mother of God on her right and John the Forerunner, John the Baptist on her left, or reverse as we're looking at it, and Jesus above her head. And I want to point out, just because we'll talk about it a little bit later, above Jesus is the etimisia, the table. And the table is the stand-in for God himself. Now, the Byzantine Orthodox Christians were very careful not to depict God the Father because, of course, nobody ever saw him. So he's depicted as a table. Now, red-skinned deities, here you have a Hindu manuscript, and I'm not going to murder the name of this deity, but this text here is from the 18th century, but this deity, Mahayana Buddhist text from the 4th to the 5th century, indicates that pagan images and pagan references are, of course, naturally appropriated by the early Christians and integrated into their art and culture. 5th century Byzantine roots. Here we go to Ravenna by default because they're so magnificent, the Byzantine mosaics from that area. This is 5th century, as probably many of you know, from San Vitali. And this here depicts Theodora, who was Justinian's wife. Absolutely magnificent, noble, classically Byzantine, erect figures with very little what I would call noise. And that becomes the Greek tradition, something that is very readable, very direct, very aggressively single imaged. And this is a very typical one to give as an example of that. The Russians, as we will learn in the 19th and 18th century and the earlier, adopt this nobility of form and simplicity in their icons of Hodegetria, show the way, where the Mother of God, typically her hand is pointing towards the child Jesus, and Jesus is depicted as a young adult, or an adult, but in a small body, because he is the sacrifice, he is the Lamb of God. And that's a way of depicting the symbolism of sacrifice and a way of denoting the special status of Jesus, not as a child, but as a Messiah. So the formal structure of the icons, language made visual, have an internal structure, balance. Armature is very important, often cruciform, and we'll see that. Gesture and pose have meaning. They're on wood panel. They are painted with egg tempera, which is an egg yolk medium, elongated with an alcohol of some sort, beer, wine, vinegar, maybe, and then the pigments ground into it. And why they're so enduring is that oftentimes the pigments are minerals, so they don't fade. Your most fugitive colors are the vegetative colors, the colors that are distilled from vegetation, but the icon doesn't tend to use very many of those. The icon will use clays, that have leached the color of the vegetative material around them into the clay, so it's relatively stable. But more often than not, they're minerals, and the minerals are oftentimes altered by a chemical process, by heat or mixing of different colors, green and blue and yellow making green, for instance. So to just tell you how icons are used, they're venerated, they're not worshipped. The Orthodox contemplate the image of the icon and enter into sort of a yoga-like, if you will, trance for those of us who are not Orthodox. And so the sound that the experts in yoga perform in their chest to get them to a higher, undistracted level is similar to the kind of contemplation that the Orthodox will use to enter into a state of prayer by contemplating the icon. So the icon is a very, very powerful medium for prayer. And so they are on wood. The wood has a degree, you can over exaggerate this, but it has a degree of symbolism. It is wood. Jesus was a carpenter. Joseph was a carpenter. He is crucified on a wood cross. Wood has a symbolic resonance to it. The icon is covered with a white gesso, a white layer, which some iconographers refer to as the shadowless world of uniform light of God, where there's nothing but light. And then the colors of the Russian icon and the Greek to a certain extent are laid down from dark to light. In part, we could suggest a reference to Genesis, the world from darkness to light. So the actions of the scripture, as defined in the scripture, are manifested in how the icon uses its material and the symbols of the icons. What types of events influence the development of icons? Because icons are static to a degree. Remember Egyptian art. Once you establish the image of, let's say, Isis, or a deity, it doesn't change because you've established that. That is what that deity looks like. So sacred art, by its very nature, is conservative, but it's not stationary. It does get influenced by any number of these things that you've just read that I won't reread for you. The chronology, the earliest icons that we know are from St. Catherine's Monastery, and they date from roughly the 6th century onwards. Athos, which Patty had referenced earlier, at the monasteries have some very old icons, and throughout Greece, you get some ancient icons as well. Moscow assumes the mantle of the Third Rome when Constantinople falls. Rome, in Italy, first Rome, moving to Byzantium, the second Rome, the fall of Byzantium, the fall of Constantinople at the hands of the Turks in 1453 causes the Russians to welcome their fellow Orthodox to Moscow for protection, and the Russians assume the title of the Third Rome, and the Russian royal house adopts the two-headed Byzantium eagle as its symbol. That's how that happens. 15th century, the British Museum have the Black George. From non-naturalistic depictions in icons, you move as the centuries progress to more naturalism. The early icons emphasize line, Dionysius, a Greek painter, brought to Russia from the court of Constantinople, introduces the Greek style of painting to the Russians, and you see the waning of the Hellenic influence as time progresses, and the Russians develop their own style. So here are the various chronologies, and here's the comparison. 14th century John the Baptist. This is in the British Museum. It was painted in Constantinople in an imperial manufacturing. We know this, the exquisite style of painting, the extraordinary quality of it. It comes from the very best artistic hand. And this is the 1300s. Same collection at the British Museum. The Black George 1400s is Russian. And already you see between 100 years, the Russians doing two things: introducing dynamic drama. There's emotional drama in the Greek icon, John the Baptist. There's the emotional drama there. And there's a sense of his hair and all that, of an implication of sort of dynamic, intellectual quality, but it's not movement. The Russians introduce movement, and the Russians, like their music, introduce narrative from the very beginning. They're consummate, like the Irish, consummate storytellers. Now, of course, we have to refer at any point to the Parthenon marbles, formerly known as the Elgin marbles. The less said, the better. But what I want to point out here is that it's Phidias and the Greeks who really develop the expression of the condition of the human through gesture. Pain, sorrow, whatever it might be, there are stock gestures that are introduced by the Greeks and fully formed in the classical final period, the flowering of Greek culture, that gives the icon the heritage of the ability to express emotion through gesture. And this is a perfect example, 1430, 1460 at the Museum of Russian Icons. It is John the Forerunner, John the Baptist. It is the left-hand panel of an iconostasis, a whole wall of icons, which protected the high altar from the congregation. The congregation did not witness the miraculous transformation of the bread and the wine and all of that. That was done in private behind an iconostasis. That iconostasis, by the way, becomes the rood screen, R-O-O-D-E, rood screen, in European cathedrals. And then it's eventually just sort of, it falls apart and becomes the dais on which the altar is placed. But the Greek Orthodox have a full enclosed screen. And this guy here is one of the most important features of it. It would be Christ in the middle. On the right-hand side of Jesus is his mother, Mary, and on his left-hand side, a panel such as this. This is a Greek influenced Russian artist, or a Greek trained Russian artist. We know this. The translucent style of the application of the egg tempera is classically a 15th century Greek. The thrusting angle of John the Baptist's jaw denotes his courage to pre-baptize pre-Christians. His open hands are a Greek gesture of welcome, come unto me. His slightly bended knees is a characteristic of the John the Baptist as described in the scripture of humility. He's bending his knees slightly, and to further enhance his humility and even his timidity are the turned in toes. So he's not standing astride, he's not akimbo. This is a humble man welcoming people, but of extraordinary intellectual power and also courage, the thrust of the jaw. All of that Greek, 100%. Quick look at the differences between the styles: Byzantine, single figure, majesty, solemn stillness, introspective, and then the Russian develop this animation narratives. And the physical difference is that the Russians start using this very dark olive green to start the color of the skin tones. And so as the icons age and they get worn away by use or just condition, you get rather dark figures in icons. It's not that there would have originally been this dark, but it's just that the more recent higher layers of highlights, the brighter colors have been worn away. So here's a Greek 15th to 16th century from the Thessaloniki. Of course, you recognize St. Nicholas, the bad boy in the Nicene Council. On his above his head to his right is Jesus, who came to rescue him in the cell that he was thrown into for being disruptive. And Jesus, of course, brings back his Bible. And on his left is the Mother of God, who restored his bishopric robes as he was languishing in the cell. And of course, his imprisoners saw this happening and released him immediately in the presence of Jesus and the Mother of God. And of course, so would we today if such a thing were to happen. So they did the right thing. And there's the Black George, again, by the Russians. Cretan icons here. We have 18th century on your left, 15th century on your right. Again, I want to emphasize the stillness, the majesty, the potency of that single figure dominating the frame. Now, you can see on the Cretan Macedonian 15th century, there's a frame within the frame. The Russians call that the kovchek. And the frame within the frame, the inside of the frame, the kovchek, is the ark. It's the container of the sacred. And the frame tends to be the place where we occupy, us terrestrial humans occupy. And so in the Russian icon of Vladimir, the Mother of God, on the left, you see saints who inhabited our world and lived with us on the edge of the frame, and the Mother of God and Jesus in the middle. And this is a Vladimir type. It's broadly the meta framework for this is called the umilinia, the tenderness type. And on the right-hand side is this beautiful, noble figure from the Italian Renaissance from the 13th century, Duccio from Siena. And this is the Hodigitria type, the show the way. But already the Italians are playing around with the traditions. You notice Jesus is not a young adult, but he's depicted in a more humanistic style, which becomes the emblematic part of the Renaissance, the infusion of humanism in art. And so he's depicted as a child. The Greeks and the Russians here on the left is our Kazan majesty type or Hodigitria type, Mother of God, from our collection. Both these icons are from our collection. This is mid 17th century, 1650, the Hodigitria, the Mother of God, with little adult Jesus. But the umilinia, tenderness, is a different dynamic. So Jesus is depicted as a child because the dynamic of this icon for the a person who's contemplating it and for the person who is venerating this icon, they're venerating it not for the power and the punch of the Hodigitria, which is what I call the big guns. If you're in deep trouble, go to Hodigitria. If you're having trouble with your kids, you want to go to this very tender, beautiful image of the Mother of God and a young boy nuzzling her cheek and wrapping his arm around his mother. A totally different dynamic and a different purpose. So if you're venerating icons, you don't just venerate an icon for any reason. You have a particular problem, you go to a particular icon. So it's not like the Roman Catholic panoply of different saints, you know, St. Jude for hopeless cases, or the Stations of the Cross, which are essentially icons. And the Station of the Cross, of course, is a sequential story of the passion of Jesus. And you go to those for specific reasons. Here's John the theologian, Greek, versus John, Russian. And there's not, you're already experts. You could see right away, the Russians are packing in the stories, packing in the detail. And then because of you, I had to, of course, include Dominicos, known as El Greco, dies in 1614. 6 years later, the Mayflower arrives on our shores here in the United States, as it was back then New England, and we're living in mud huts, basically. And meanwhile, here back at the ranch, this fabulous Cretan Greek icon-trained artist goes into the court of Spain and starts painting such masterpieces as the Burial of Count Orgaz. Now, on the left is a classic El Greco icon. Note the architecture at the back. It doesn't make any physical sense. It's all symbolic architecture. And he transmutes that into this extraordinary, emblematically El Greco world of the imagination, the world of swirling figures, and something that might remind you of Chagall. But I hate to tell you, we'll not get to Chagall, but Chagall is more influenced by icons than he is, obviously, by El Greco, but nonetheless. St. Nicholas, here it is, 2 masterpieces from our museum. These are monumental icons. They're about 3 by 5 feet. St. Nicholas on your left, 16th century, 1500s, tons of lapis lazuli in this icon, use of paint, denoting that it was probably the Moscow area, very expensive. The Vita, the life of St. Nicholas, is spread across from left to right, left to right, left to right, across the plane, and left to right at the bottom, ending up, of course, with the removal of St. Nicholas's body from what is present-day Turkey to Bari, southern Italy. So it's about anecdote. And same with John the Evangelist. He's depicted here in his various travels. The second to end on the right-hand lower corner is the famous image that all of you will know, of course, the Johns together in the cave in the islands, writing the scripture. So Russia, 16th century, Third Rome, European influences start to come through. They become much more Russian, and a guy called Ushakov, who dies in 1686, ushers in this period of great flowering of the Russian style, which is in early phases looks like this. So it has an affinity with the Greeks, but it's already pulling apart. And then eventually it becomes very, very obviously Russian. The Smolensk Mother of God from the Museum of Russian Icons. And if I don't say they're from somewhere else, they're from our collection. This is a Smolensk Mother of God, Hodigitria type, Greek influenced, obviously. On the left, there's little Jesus as a high-foreheaded individual denoting wisdom. And on his side, on the right, is John the Baptist, of course, a Paraskeva, whom all you know, underneath him. And on the other side, a guardian angel. And I forget who, probably Sergius or one of those. Anecdote. This, by the way, is signed, very rare icon. It's actually signed by the artist. And then this here is in the late 17th or early 18th century style, as it turns out, Ushakov school. It's a little bit later. Prince influence icons. Of course, the monastic development of Russia, import books from Europe in vast quantities. So they would have known Albrecht Dürer through Prince. And obviously the Smolensk Christ has a strong affinity with such images. The Last Judgment, Michelangelo, the Sistine Chapel, at the very often overlooked back wall, because it's rather chaotic between you and me. It's not the most felicitous composition, but what people miss is that Michelangelo actually wasn't after a felicitous composition. This was Michelangelo influenced by the art of the icon, the narrative of the icon. The narrative drives this image, not the aesthetic beauty of it. So for me as an icon person, this is actually much more interesting to look at than the ceiling is, but nonetheless, the ceiling is more beautiful, I do admit. But let's compare these with our Museum of Russian Icons Last Judgment from about 100 years later from Yaroslavl. In the middle, that pink thing, you see the cross, and underneath the cross is the table, the Artemisia, and above them is Jesus coming back for the second time for the final judgment. And underneath the Artemisia, which is the stand-in for God the Father, unrepresented because we haven't seen him, but his hand is there holding the scales of justice, and they're weighing the soul of Jesus. And in Michelangelo's part here, it's very similar. The judgment is happening in the same quadrant as it is happening in the Russian icon. The lower quadrant are the judged people going down to hell. And on the right-hand side, swirling up, are the saved souls in the very same type of composition that you will find in the icon. 18th, 19th century convergence change. By this time in Russia, and actually in Greece as well, they're being mass produced. Everybody has to have an icon. Everybody gets a Desus set for their wedding. So in Russia, the outliers are what are called the old believers, and they happen in the later 1600s, just as Peter the Great is ending his reign. A breakaway conservative group of Russian Christians who move to the Urals and the Siberian towns, and they produce icons in the old style, such as this one on the left-hand side of Elijah and the fiery chariot from our collection also. Lovely little icon. And these are retro in a sense, because by the 19th century, on the right-hand side, Simeon here, you get the Russian icons, which are much more finicky and decorative. The true believers stick to their guns. So you have a breakaway in Russian icons, which is always very interesting, between the old believer icons and the new styles. And these are some of the new styles. 18th century on the left, God forbid, we actually see God the Father. And we see God the Son, Jesus, and Jesus on his chest, the little dove, signifying, as we know, the Spirit. So this is known as Paternitas, but it's obviously a Trinity icon, which strictly speaking in the Orthodox tradition is a no-no. So they couch it in all sorts of difficult ecclesiastical and liturgical obfuscations that hide the fact that in actual fact, this is just simply a Trinity. And I'll probably be admonished for saying such things, but that's what it looks like. Mother of God, unburnt bush on the right-hand side is what I've characterized as the classic intellectual icon. This would not be seen in your village homestead. It's too complicated. It refers to classical elements such as earth, wind, and fire. So these are pre-Christian things. The four evangelists are in the four corners. The symbolism of the eight stars, the eighth day of paradise, Savior, 7 days of creation, et cetera, et cetera. It's all too intellectual for the average person. And so by the 19th century, you have a whole load of these icons being made for the intelligentsia and the priestly class. Ending up now quickly. I know this is a whirlwind, and I'll take questions, but here's a close-up of this absolutely magnificent Yaroslav icon, mid-1600s. There are two others of this type that are at the Yaroslav Museum. It's just huge. And you see at the very bottom right-hand corner in red, you see Lucifer, the fallen archangel, Lucifer or Satan, riding a pandemonium, a Greek beast made up of all sorts of different elements. And in Lucifer's arms, and Lucifer still has his wings, by the way, because he was an archangel. In his arms is a Judas with a bag of silver coins, which he received for betraying Jesus. And lo and behold, right above him is Michael, having defeated him. Jesus calls on Michael to defeat Satan. And in the middle, slightly to the left, is a cartouche, a round cartouche. And those are the four kingdoms of the earth as they were thought of at the time. And of course, the three-headed griffin refers to Alexander the Great and how he inherited his kingdom to his three heirs. And those kingdoms of the temporal world will be smote by the second coming, and the quick and the dead are rising up on the right-hand side of the icon. And what I love the most, and how I want to end this, is how the Russians in the Orthodox Russians view us as Europeans. On the right-hand side are those being sent down into hell. And Paul is pointing to Jesus and saying to them, look what you've missed. And the top group are us, the Greeks, the Jews, the English. They're all in national costumes. And you notice we're separate from the Russians, who are about to enter hell, and they're the Russian monarchs, nuns, a prostitute, and priests going into hell. But even in the Last Judgment, the Russians would like to see us separated out from them as they are the chosen people, even in damnation. And so that's it, guys. I'll return. I'll return, and if we have any questions, I can return to the images. But that's it. That's us. We're here in Clinton, Massachusetts, waving the flag of the icon solo sometimes, because the Russians have abandoned all of us right now. But
Kent, thank you ever so much. That was magnifique. A tour de force, definitely a tour de force.
Quick and fast. There you go.
Let me tell you, please, that Kent has very kindly agreed to answer some questions. And if you have questions using this particular format of Zoom, you need to press the little chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you all press that, you will be able to see any questions that people have. And if you type them up, I will then put them to Kent.
Oh, okay, good.
Kent, can I ask you, how did you, first of all, get to come across icons? You told us a little bit about your experience in the National Gallery of Ireland when they had this fantastic. That was where you came across them.
Yeah. Well, it was the ghetto of the history of art, because I was working for John Hutchinson at that point, who was in charge of those collections. And he was looking at the early Renaissance gold ground panel paintings. And what in heck do you do with icons that all look like, 14th century Europe Renaissance pictures, but most of them are 19th century. So where do you put them? And so I was set off to do a little bit of research, and of course came across that early, the research that was available at the time about these icons. And so they rest, if not comfortably, but they rest with the sort of pre-Quattrocento Italian panel paintings in Dublin, and that's pretty well where most icons wind up, you know.
Just to say, you also mentioned the Fayum paintings. These are beautiful, beautiful paintings, and you showed us one which you have recently acquired for your museum. But people in Dublin have the privilege also of seeing some of two Fayum portraits, I think, in the Egyptian. There's a little Egyptian room in the National Museum in Kildare Street.
Yep.
And it's very nice. It's very small, but you go up a lovely windy staircase, and you can see a beautiful Fayum portrait of a boy, I think about 10 years of age, and it is something. It speaks to you. It is really, really fantastic.
They're astoundingly intimate. To
Yeah.
stare at a face from the 2nd and 3rd century, and the one in Dublin is an old acquisition, so it's a really good quality Fayum. A lot of them, like ours, which isn't great, have been on the market for the last century or so. All the great ones are already in the private collections, and the two in Dublin are really good. There was a question, by the way, Patty, about do people come into the museum and venerate the icons? When we opened first, yes, a lot of people did, and enough that we had to ask ladies to not kiss the icons with lipstick, because that was becoming a problem. And then the other thing that we had to do to answer that question to the person who asked the question, and when I say we, it was the founder of the museum, Gordon Langton, the industrialist that I had mentioned, and I realized that we had to have a Russian Orthodox authority to come into the museum and bless, sanctify the place. So the museum has been blessed as a place of worship. So it, in a sense, is a church. Now, the average visitor does not know that we do not perform as a church, we perform as an art museum. But it is sacred ground.
Yeah. Is that reflected in the sounds? Do you play music, or do you have silence, or what does it sound like? Can you give us an impression of that, Kent?
We play Russian Orthodox chant very delicately in the background. And we also have LED light system throughout the building behind coves. And so while the icons are individually lit constantly, LED lights, the rooms change color over time. So similar to the changing environment in a church for a period of time that one might stay there, because anybody who's been to an Orthodox ceremony, 3 hours is a short service,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Just not too far. I'm here in Terranure, a suburb of Dublin, towards the southwest. And between here and the centre of Dublin, there's another suburb called Harold's Cross, and there's a cemetery there called Mount Jerome Cemetery, and the little church in front of it has been taken over, in fact, as a Russian Orthodox church. So people in Dublin who might like to see some examples of Russian icons and hear some of the sacred music in a Russian Orthodox church can go there. And the difference, of course, between Russian Orthodox music and Greek Orthodox music is that there are female voices also in Russian Orthodox music, so it gives it a different timbre completely.
Yep. Yeah, it does. Yeah. Well, the Russian Orthodox, of course, the saints are all the same until the the 1000 or so. So all the early Christian saints are shared, and there's a vast array of female saints. So it's kind of interesting. Of course, well, that's a whole separate subject of the position of women versus men. And Athos, of course, is the prime example where the hands of the male are firmly on the steering wheel.
Yes, definitely. Can I ask you, where does one source icons of this quality nowadays? I mean, is it in the auction houses in London or Paris or Zurich, or where does one go? Because these are superb. I mean, the images you showed are absolutely astonishing.
Well, one thing is that Gordon Langton started collecting in 1993. So in less than 2 decades, he assembled what is considered by icon authorities around the world the largest and probably the finest private collection of Russian icons outside of Russia. The answer to that is money, to be quite honest. If you have extraordinarily deep pockets, when I started to work with Gordon, in the 1990s, he was able to acquire major works in the early period before the Russian Orthodox or oligarchs decided that money was absolutely no object. And that cut us out, by the 2000s, that cut us out of the market. And then the other thing is that prior to coming up to and including perestroika, Russia had not adopted the European EU standards of cultural patrimony restrictions. And so you could buy icons in Russia and you could bring them to the United States, whereas obviously now a lot of our time is spent worrying about provenance and making sure that they haven't come out illegally,
Yeah. Can I just voice, Kent, on behalf of Derek Bridges, who was the person responsible for making the link with you and who you went to school with in Dublin? He says, Derek says, if someone came into the museum with an icon under their arm, what features would surprise you the most?
Well, I did a take it to the curator in our library, Derek, and she was a very elegant lady, and her father was in our embassy in Moscow in the very early Bolshevik Soviet period, working for Davis, Ambassador Davis. And she came in with this beautiful icon, and instantly I knew it was a wonderful piece. And I looked at it and I talked to a few of my colleagues, and it turned out to be an Ushakov, signed Ushakov icon. So part of me, the evil part of me was because she said, well, is it worth anything? What should I do with it? And I said, well, it is probably worth something, yes. And we'd be delighted to accept it as a gift in the museum. And then she said, sadly, she said, well, what do you think? Is it really worth something? And I said, I can't tell you because I'm a museum person, but I can't tell you. This appears to be signed by Ushakov, who is considered one of the great masters of Russian icon painting, and it would be an enormously expensive icon. So she sold it, and it was too expensive for us to buy it. It went for 1.3 million, and that came into the museum. Wow. Well, the other thing I could see, what drew Icon to set up, that's an interesting question.
What drew Gordon to set up the museum and to put his fortune into this collection? Yeah.
Well, Clinton, Massachusetts was the world headquarters for his plastics empire. He employed 10,000 plus employees. He had factories all over the world. Ireland, in Bray, there's a Nipro factory, in China, all over the world, Brazil. But his favorite place was Moscow. And it was the only manufacturing concern that he owned that made absolutely no money whatsoever. It was a disaster. It was a classic Russian business. Everybody else was taking the money around him, but none of the money flowed into the company. But he fell in love with the Russians. Now, Gordon grew up in the Midwest of the United States in a town called Peoria, Illinois. He went to a very fine university here in the United States called Cornell to do engineering. And he was an extraordinary person and very Midwesterner. On the East Coast, we tend to be a bit snobby and sophisticated, and we look to Europe as our models. The Midwesterners look to nobody for their models. They're very much like the Russians. They're themselves. And so he felt an affinity with the Russians, and he would go out at least 4 times a year. When I started working for him, we would travel 4 times a year out to Russia, and he just reveled in the people's humor, their bonhomie, their warmth. And he loved icons. He wasn't a sophisticated arty type. He loved wood carving. In all his travels, he would collect Buddhas because he thought the castings were interesting. He was an engineer, and he loved icons because they're so direct and they appear at first glance to be very simple. He realized that they were not, but they're very accessible, and it's an art form that he felt he was very comfortable with, and he had a great eye. Who knew? I don't know how that happened. He wasn't, this was just a crazy thing.
We have a request from Anne Tormey. Theo, perhaps you could open the microphone for Anne Tormey.
Hello.
Anne, we can hear you.
Hello, Kent. It's not quite a question. It's not quite a question. I just wanted to say, as a founder member of the Irish-Hellenic Society, thank you very much. And tomorrow I'm going to a place you've just talked about, Ravenna. I live in the south of France, and I'm a director of an international women's club, and we're going for 2 days to Ravenna, to the Dante and Musée Municipale, a lot of the museums, and just say how wonderful you're like. Ravenna is my favorite city in the whole world. Yeah. And thank you. Paddy, can I have a little word with you? You don't know this, I bet you. I went to Mount Athos as a man.
Oh, no.
We won't tell anyone.
Well, everybody knows, you know how tall I am. I was 22 and I dressed as a man and I got in.
You'll be haunted forever, Anne.
I know, and I look forward to seeing you at the lunch on the 3rd of April. I'm just off to America and Mexico, so I'll see you on the 3rd of April.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much,
forward to that, Anne. Thank you very much.
I lived in America for a long time, and I've been to your part of the world in America, and you're a most interesting lecturer, and you taught me so much. I absolutely adore icons, and thank you very much. Come to Dublin, we'll all get together.
Of course, I'll be there in June.
Good. Okay. All right. Thanks, Paddy. Nice.
Thank you, Anne. All the best, and enjoy Ravenna. I'm very envious. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Did you know today is Petrus's birthday? Wish him happy birthday.
Oh, right.
He's a founder member as well, Ken.
Indeed, yes.
60 years. Yeah, absolutely.
That's our patron.
I must have a shout out for Derek, because of course I knew Derek since I was 14. So we've known each other for a long, long time.
Wow.
Good friend at school.
Well, yeah. I've known Petrus for 60 years.
I knew in Mountjoy,
When you say Mountjoy, do you mean Mountjoy School in Dublin?
Yeah.
Do you mean Scoil Wanshwa? It's an Irish school in Mountjoy Square.
No.
My sister.
Malahide Road.
I didn't know there was a second Mountjoy. My sister went to Scoil Wanshwa, which is Mountjoy Square in Dublin. Yeah, an Irish school. I thought, my God, don't tell me they had mixed sex schools 25, 30 years ago.
Perish the thought.
Anyway, good. Thank you very much. It was really nice. Really, really nice.
Thank you very much, Anne.
Bye.
Thank you. All the best. Theo, could we ask Dimitrios Tsouros to say a few words?
Yep.
Dimitri. He has his mic turned off, I think. Dimitri? Can you hear us, Dimitri? We'll try, maybe, Theo, we can try Stella Xenopoulou. She also asked if she could have her mic switched on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Stella, yes, we can hear you. Far
hello.
ahead.
Yes, thank you. Very nice lecture. Thank you very much. I started looking at icons as all my life I've been praying in front of in a different way. Thank you very much. And I do sometimes go to the Russian Orthodox Church here in Dublin. And it's the only Orthodox, other Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church. Sorry, I've been so. But I will start looking at icons closer now, and I will start identifying those differences that you were mentioning there. But yeah, we have an iconographer in the Greek community, and two actually iconographers, and yes, they've explained how they do it and what a detailed work it is. And I don't know if you have any iconographers in the museum that show people how they make the icons, and they start with praying and all that.
Yes.
Is it part of the museum? Yeah, okay.
Very, very important part of the museum is how they're made. And so we have a number of opportunities. In the summer, we have a school of iconography that lasts a week. So people stay at a hotel and they come in every day and they go through the whole 9 yards, because of course the icon is created through prayer, by prayer, and with prayer. And so I went through it myself, and I'm not Orthodox, but it's a fascinating contemplative discipline, because you still your mind and you focus and you reduce your ego when you're painting an icon, because you're replicating what went on before. And as I always say in the tours here, is that icons have to be absolutely accurate, because they are a reflection of the scripture. So you don't suddenly take off and decide that Christ in the tomb should have one garment. Icons always depict two garments because the Bible talks about two garments. And sure, Titian and all the Italian Renaissance much preferred one garment, cascading beautifully outside of the coffin. But that is completely inaccurate. It's two garments and you stick with it. So when you're painting an icon, you're really obeying God. Is the purpose of it, is that you're not an individual, you are a vehicle for the scripture. And it's fascinating. Yes, so it's very important to understand that, believer or not believer,
Yes, I've met some, there is a society of iconographers in Ireland, and Irish, some lovely, I met two lovely ladies that run that society, and I didn't know that thing exists, a society like that exists, but they say they sometimes in Catholic churches, they go and they paint, they make some icons at the back in small, in the small areas, smaller areas, and yeah, so it's interesting. If for a Greek, at least for me, you see, because we were born into it, when somebody speaks about the icons, it's a very interesting, point of view, because we wouldn't know to observe those things that you would observe. And it's very, actually, the other thing I found very interesting in your presentation is that you showed how from ancient Greek the statues, and how all this movement and how all this expression came into the iconography. It's very interesting, very interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
Kent, can I just voice a question from somebody? I can't see the surname, Joyce. And it says St. Peter's Church of Ireland in Drogheda is used by Russian and Indian and Syrian Orthodox. Are there similarities between Russian and Indian icons? Now you showed an earlier a Hindu painting with the red color of skin. There were, of course, Orthodox in the Eastern world, huge numbers of them, because of the Syriac connection. Syriac was an extremely important connection between China. There were loads of Christians in China in older times, and similarly there were Orthodox in India. What do you think, Kent? Do you know of any icons from that part of the world?
Yes, of course. There's a whole school of Syrian icons. So they have Syrian script as opposed to Cyrillic or Greek. But of course, remember, the bedrock of the icon is the scripture. And so as the scriptures are written, so goes the icon. So the things that are depicted in a Syrian icon or a Christian Indian icon, or in fact, a Japanese Orthodox icon, which we have on display currently here at the museum, look like icons. The script is different. The one that we have in Japanese, unfortunately, the script is in English, but there are some with Japanese script in it. But very subtly, you saw that red god from the Indian tradition, and then Sophia, the manifestation of the wisdom of God, depicted as a red-skinned figure. That seems to be a cross-pollination of imagery. And remember that Russia, and indeed Constantinople, there are very few barriers in that part of the continent. And so things flow. And with the Mughal various tribute paying of the city-states of Russia right through the early 1500s, there's trade. And so there are influences that I see: a Mughal miniature painting, Muslim influence miniature painting, and the Russian icon in the tradition that I showed you of that very exquisite Simeon on a stylite, on a pillar, that very meticulous, detailed, jewel-like painting. It seems to me as an art historian that you could make a case that that has its roots aesthetically, not spiritually or in any other degree, but aesthetically, it has its roots in Mughal miniature painting.
Comment also from Derek. He says there are two icons painted by a nun from Derry in St. Kevin's Catholic Church in Glendalough, of St. Kevin and of St. Lawrence O'Toole. Lawrence O'Toole is the patron saint of Dublin, actually. And I think I'm right in saying that he was the first Irish saint to be actually canonized. The other Irish saints, including people like St. Patrick and St. Bridget and St. Columcille, they were acclaimed as saints. And you know, Kent, that the Irish government has recently decided to have an additional public holiday, not this year, but next year. And it'll be held on the first Monday in February, and it'll be in honor of St. Bridget's Day.
Yeah.
And I have suggested that they should also have another public holiday for St. Bridget's official birthday, when the ice and the storms and the wind are not blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are, there are icons of St. Patrick and Bridget and all the rest of them.
Are they in the Russian tradition, Kent, as well? I've seen them from Greek tradition, but are in the Russian tradition are there?
It's really the Russian tradition, the style of the Russian tradition has really taken over because it offers those narrative opportunities that are very rich and have tremendous potential. So for a large part of the icon making tradition these days, one could point to Russia more closely than the much more puritanical, if you will, although you never think of the Greeks as being particularly puritanical, but that's the tradition, the visual, the aesthetic purity of it. But all icons typically wood, symbolic, egg tempera, symbolic, its ties to the scriptures. It's a constant art form. And in actual fact, the beauty of it is that really in terms of the history of art, there is nothing more enduring in our contemporary culture than what comes down to us as the icon. It's still the same.
I just asked Theo if you could let Dimitri Tsouros speak to us. Theo? Dimitris is trying to get through to us there.
Yes, the microphone is open.
Dimitri, please speak to us. Dimitri? No, he can't get through. Tina Kanema, what can we do? Listen, Kent, can I just say on behalf of all of us and all of those people who have put in the questions on the right-hand side that we have been honored by
Not
what you did for us
I-
tonight. It was
cannot.
absolutely wonderful. And it has opened our eyes. We have gone from Clinton in Massachusetts to Dublin and the the Irish-Hellenic Society and the Arts Club, which you know, and to Greece and to Moscow and to Kiev and to Mount Athos and over to Syria and on to India. So it's been a fascinating evening, and you have done us a great honor by telling us the story from your magnificent Museum of Russian Icons. Long may it live, and long may you live, Kent, explaining to us all about the icon, these things of absolute beauty. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Derek Bridges for suggesting having Kent with us, and to Theos Utos for making it all possible through the magic of not icons, but Zoom. We'll see you soon, Kent, in the summer. We look forward to that. All the best. Good night now to all of you. Felices Nichta.